I recently had the chance to chat to actor Bill Homewood via WhatsApp. Now, I'll be honest with you, that's a sentence I never thought I would say. My first question was fairly straightforward. How did he get the job on the Renford Rejects?
I think my agent will have called me at home and said, you got an interview on Thursday or something. I remember going along for an interview, I think actually at the Spotlight offices in Leicester Square, or just off Leicester Square. I think that's where I went for this one, and popped into a room and chatted to a director and a writer, Stephen Baywall and Chris Wilson. And I think there might have been a third person in there. By the time I left the room, I remember thinking I'd got the part, which you don't, very often you're wrong when you think you've got a part, but I think we were more or less by the end of the conversation talking about how we were going to portray Stoker. So I kind of knew. That's as much as I can remember. I remember immediately they showed me a bit of script, immediately coming up with Stoker as I did him, which was an amalgamation of several gym teachers that I'd had at school. I was born in 1946, which is 73 years ago, and therefore at school all my gym teachers, well, all my teachers pretty much, my male teachers anyway, had been in the military, in the army. And of course, gym teachers who'd been in the army were a special breed, a bit sergeant major-ish and a bit fierce. And I based Stoker on a sort of cross-section of gym teachers I'd had over the gym and games teachers I'd had over the years. Even the walk I did, the Stoker running along the touchline, I had a football teacher at junior school who used to run along the touchline like that, picking up his knees, encouraging us to pick up our knees when we ran. And the whole tradition of never passing backwards, always passing forwards, always doubling your boots before the match, and basing everything you do on the style of play that Sir Stanley Matthews was famous for in his day, all that stuff. Because the writer Chris Wilson trusted me with this, what I would get from the office was a script in which my part was, my replies and things were just like a line or two. And then I developed them in the style of Stoker, or, you know, a list of negatives. He never said, that's true. He would always say, that ain't never not true, and such like. So I had a little bet on with the writer each week that I could add another negative to one of my sentences. And the maximum I got up to was 14 negatives cancelling each other out in one sentence. I think that was the longest ever, and I think that was an episode on a beach in Sardinia. Anyway, my memories of the show are all like that. It was a hilarious time. The part was hilarious, and the locations were fun, and we all got on very well. It was a good laugh.
Yes, well, it always looks like you're having such great fun. Your character was actually quite intense, because sometimes you're looking people straight in the eye and things like that. Do you think your training kind of helped you with that?
My training, well, I tell you, if you've done a lot of theatre work and then you do screen work, and I had done a lot of screen work by then, so I knew this already, but you do learn not to make big wide arm gestures, because you're going to force your cameraman to step back and to pull out, and you're not going to get the close-ups. So you learn to be intense and small physically, but to put that intensity into your face. And I saw Stoker as a furious man. He was furious with the girliness of football, the very idea of girls playing football, the very idea of passing backwards, the very idea of fancy, flashy trainer-type football boots, and so on and so on. All this enraged him, and so he was more or less constantly in a rage. And he and Terry, his thuggish son were actually a complicated, vengeful, and angry couple of people. They did one episode where I think somebody came round to the house, Stoker's house, and if I remember right, I've only just remembered this, Jamie, I think they put an apron on me, and when I came to the door, I was evidently cooking. I think it was a stroke of genius by the writer. That was a side of Stoker that was never developed beyond that one scene, but it was very good fun.
I think that's what was great about that show, is certainly early on, for the main characters, there were kind of two worlds, weren't there? There was sort of being inside that cafe and also being on the football field, and they did a very good job of splitting those two worlds up and making them collide occasionally.
Yeah, and actually, while we're being kind of intellectual about it, they introduced a third world too, which was the fantasy world, in which occasionally we travelled back through time. For instance, when Stoker became Basilus Stokerus or something, Emperor of Rome, and that was the episode in which Stoker was thrown by a giant catapult, which his son had accidentally pulled the lever to operate when Stoker was sitting in it. And in fact, I was very badly injured shooting that scene because they mistakenly operated the catapult when I was sitting in it. It's a long story, but that's exactly what happened. And I was thrown through the air. I was on stage in London in Phantom of the Opera at the same time, and I was filming in Isha, and I was severely injured. I had fractured skull, damage to my spine, and so on. It was an awful accident. I was thrown quite a long way and quite high up, and landed headfirst on a tree that had been laid on its side. And I should really remember the episode for that, but in fact it was one of the funniest things I've ever filmed, and even that episode, in which I required hospital help afterwards and a long period of rehabilitation actually, even that episode I remember, and it makes me laugh to think of it. The idea was the writer went off into a complete flight of fantasy, and suddenly the history of how football developed and all of that led them to Rome. Another time we were cowboys, and Stoker was Il Santoro, and it was a sort of homage stroke send-up of the Magnificent Seven. I think that probably is the best episode of all. But again, the license to be very, very silly was never very far away, and I think probably as the episodes went on, we all got madder and madder. Really, it was a very funny show, wasn't it?
I can agree, and certainly at the beginning, even though it wasn't quite as overt as that, there were still little fantasy elements in there, weren't there?
Oh yes. I mean, well, establishing my character, I think in the very first or second episode, I've forgotten the name, Bruno Di Gradi, who had pretensions as an Italian footballer, said, but signor, football is an art, or something like that. Yeah. And Stoker went mad. I still remember the line, an art? An art? Football, my son, is not an art, it is a man's game. And honestly, I would deliver that line and lines like that entirely seriously, straight into the face of the other protagonist. But believe me, as soon as they shouted cut, we were all on the floor rolling about.
It's extremely funny, and it must be quite difficult for the other actors when you're being so deadpan to keep a straight face.
But the director once said to me, when we were actually filming the episode in Sardinia, which was the Wild Wild Renford, I think the episode was called. When we were filming that episode, the director said to me one day, you really don't care what you look like, do you? It's true, Jamie, there's no room for vanity when you're doing comedy. Stoker was ridiculous, and I liked playing him. And I liked playing him one-dimensional too. I didn't want to make out that deep down inside he was a softie or a nice man, or that he collected stamps or something. I was very happy to play him as a one-dimensionally nasty man, rather similar to several of my sports and gym teachers that I'd encountered in my childhood.
It comes across extremely well.
Well, thank you. My wife's an actress, Estelle Kohler, and Estelle was a leading lady at the RSC for well over 40 years, and we were comparing notes quite recently, actually, for a little joint interview we did for something. We both realized that each of us had made entire careers out of playing villains. Even in Shakespeare, I played the baddies. I once played Orsino in Twelfth Night, who's essentially a goody, although he's a bit of a sop. And it was my worst ever performance. Yes, Patrick Stewart was directing that. And Patrick one day said, "You play the guitar, don't you, Bill?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Why don't you play the guitar in the part then? It would help you, give you something to do with your hands." I was so bad at playing a nice man, an ordinary person. I did play a few later on. I got better at it as time went by. But I always went straight to the heart of villains and never had any problems at all, either in rehearsal or on stage or on screen.
Referring back to the Rejects, your on-screen relationship with Tom Weller, who played your son, you had such a great rapport, didn't you?
Yes, oh yeah, Tom and I got on very well. He's quite a methody actor, or was then, and I'm not at all a methody sort of actor. He tends to come in from underneath and I tend to come in from above. And my experience throughout my career has been that those two sorts of actors work brilliantly together. I find it easier in a way to work with method actors than I do to work with other actors who aren't so methody like me. And Tom and I really got on very well. He was quietly thuggish and I was noisily thuggish. And I think also he did a very clever thing, which was, I think from time to time, a sort of shame crossed Terry's face. I used to see it from time to time. It was one of the ingredients that used to make me laugh when I watched the episodes. Yeah, I did. I got on very well with Tom. We're in touch now, thanks to Twitter, actually, because of the Twitter interest, the ongoing Twitter interest in the Renford Rejects. It could do with being revived, couldn't it? People love it when they see it to this day. Actually, I've been lucky. I won't dwell on this because I know we're talking about the Rejects, but in the 80s, I was on the Adventure Game as a regular, but also before that I was on Multicolored Swap Shop and Saturday Superstore as an occasional studio guest, and all of those are still regarded as television cream, children's television cream, I mean classic TV, and although I did lots of other things, guesting on Rainbow and many other shows. I did a thing called So You Want to Be Top for BBC Children as well with Gary Wilmot. I did lots, but the ones that are remembered, of them, the most recent is Renford Rejects, which I think has almost achieved cult status now, hasn't it? It really was very, very good telly, wasn't it?
Oh, extremely, yes. And I was a avid watcher when I was younger, and you sort of fall out of it, and then you discover it again. It's kind of that thing people keep rediscovering. Certainly on Twitter, the amount of love on there for the show is amazing, isn't it?
I know. With anything, almost anything to do with Rejects, I do it, as you know, in my Stoker character, simply because the joke goes on. It still makes me laugh. And I've quite enjoyed people who know me as a poet or as a classical actor. I've quite enjoyed that moment when they discover me on Twitter and realize I was Stoker. Obviously, they immediately follow, and then I kind of lead them on a bit with a bit of Stoker going on about Stanley Matthews or whatever. I think it's extraordinary that 22 years later, I still am as amused by it as I was when I did it.
The combination of writing, directing, casting, all made into a magical formula, really. I was a little bit intimidated beforehand, thinking, I'm going to interview this guy, this is Basil Stoker. To me, I was slightly younger than the characters in that show. To me, you were terrifying.
Did you think I was going to say, pull your socks up, lad?
Exactly. One thing I wanted to kind of draw upon was the guest stars. Do you have any memories of the guest stars that you worked with on the Rejects?
I do, and now you've got me struggling to remember names. There was that fantastic, very high camp art critic. Oh, what was Bran Sewell from the Evening Standard? A completely brilliant, very waspish, completely brilliant journalist, and immensely knowledgeable about the arts and so on, and whom one knew as a sort of po-faced television arts pundit. And also, he had been, through a relationship, indirectly involved in the Blunt spy scandal, and so he was a fascinating man. He's dead now, but anyway, who would have thought that he would come on to Renford Rejects and be as entertaining as an actor, if you like, as he was? Complete surprise. And I know that the guys, I didn't have scenes with him, but I was there during his filming. I know the guys had a very big laugh with him. I think he needed controlling almost, because he was prepared to do just about anything. And then there was the World Cup team. Of course, the 66 team were there. I did film with them. I've got no particular memories, except it was a day or two, because I wasn't playing, I was just yelling from the touchline. But it was a day or two of quite nice, enjoyable filming. Martin Keogh was the one I spent most time talking to of all those guys. A great fullback, of course. And I think he kind of got the joke too. I think he kind of got Stoker. As a matter of fact, I think it worked out that the boys worked much more with the celebrities than Stoker. Stoker, generally speaking, if Stoker was in an episode, 9 times out of 10, the episode was about Stoker. And because I wasn't in all the episodes, out of every 12, I would have been in 8 or 9, I think, something like that, maybe 9. So there were whole episodes without me, and several of those featured celebrities. When there were my episodes, there were fewer of those sort of invited stars. Just a few times it happened. There was that guy, Rhino, who was one of the world's strongest men people, I think. And I remember him rocking up in some sort of massive 4-wheel drive thing with a number plate, which I think it was RH1NO or something. And actually, he was good fun. There was a bloke who did animatronics who was very famous for playing a gorilla in some of those big gorilla films in Hollywood. And we did an episode with him in which I was in a cage with him, but I was convulsed with laughter nearly all the time with him. I remember, I can't remember his name. He was quite brilliant. Yeah, so that was good fun. Yeah, that's another, you're right, actually, Jamie, that's another thing that marked the show out. It was extraordinarily flexible, if you think about it, that the show could move from being a vehicle for celebrities being very silly to mock history, to modern football ethics, to training and so on. A very, very interesting show. And then there was the central girl. They had, I was on the show, I was always on the show, but they had 3 different lead girls in the team. The wonderful Lucy Punch, of course, went on to great things. Holly Davidson is a very well-known trainer now. I can't remember the name of the other girl. She was very good too. It was a good gang of actors.
Yes, it was. And just to pick up on something that you said earlier about Stoker, the fact that when you were in an episode, it was most likely about you or something to do with you. Before the interview, I thought I'll brush up on a couple of episodes just kind of to see very you-centric episodes, and thought, there was an episode where you worked quite extensively with Martin Delaney. Basically, you're worried about him, you decide to get him onto the Razors team, and he has to play against the Rejects. He then kind of fakes being bad, and you end up losing the game. And there's a very interesting scene where you're trying to talk him into joining you. He won't join you, and you're practically in his face. I don't know whether you remember this at all, but the intensity of that moment and the way that they use the music to kind of make it even more intense was extremely memorable.
Well, you're describing something I can imagine very well, but I don't remember that moment. But I can tell you this, that Martin, like me, always on his lines, always on his place, always ready, the consummate professional. So all of my work with Martin was a pleasure. I quite often had passing encounters with his character, of course. There was an episode when we had confrontation. I can tell you, I don't know what the camera was on at that moment, but I can tell you, when it went on to him, he would have been as in my face as I was in his. He was jolly good to work with. Of course, he's a busy actor these days, and that was a very good start for him, that show, I know. Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't remember that specific moment. Damn, it's 22 years ago. I think it's amazing what talking to you has brought back, as a matter of fact, and it just shows what fun the show was, that it's so indelibly in my mind still.
I don't blame you for not remembering everything, because there was like 4 seasons, or 4 series, as we used to say, before the world got Americanized, and there were 13 episodes or so in each series. That's a lot of episodes.
It is, and as I did 8 or 9 in each series, that's a lot of episodes too. So they tend to go into a jumble. But also there's the fact that since that, I've been on dozens and dozens of television shows on location and in studio and so on. They do tend to jumble up in your mind a little bit. And that was 22 years ago. But I think I probably remember more about Rejects than I do about most work that I've ever done.
To bring us quite nicely to a conclusion, what have you been doing quite recently?
Well, I live in the south of France. I rather cut my own throat with regard to the London theatre, but I'd been when we moved to France early in the 20s, the 2000s. Yes. When we moved full time here, I kind of severed my relationship with the London stage scene. I'd been on and off in the West End for years by then, and I didn't mind that because I was doing more and more television. So since we've moved here, I've gone back to England to do a few things, but I do a lot of writing. And I write as a poet. I've published 4 collections, I think it is, since I moved to France. And I published them first on Facebook. I've got a page, Bill Homewood's Poem a Week by Me for You, all one word. And on that page, I publish each new poem. And when I get to enough to put into a collection, then they get published in collections, which is about once a year, once every couple of years, that sort of thing. So I'm very busy with that. I've just finished recording a great British classic, Le Mot d'Arthur, by Mallory for Naxos Audiobooks. And in fact, in the last few years, Jamie, I've been recording, in fact, over the last 20 years, I've been recording for Naxos Audiobooks, great British and French classics. But in the last few years, since I've been solely in France, I seem to have specialized in great French classics in translation, because they obviously need an actor who can slip in and out of the lingo because of all the French names, proper names, and so on in the great books by Hugo and Dumas, things like Les Miserables and the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Count of Monte Cristo and so on, which I've recorded. I have done British classics as well in recent times. But anyway, I've just finished this mammoth book, The Death of King Arthur, Le Mot d'Arthur, which is the sort of original, well, certainly the original assembly of the legends of King Arthur, which led to all the Knights of the Round Table stuff, movies, television series, other books, and so on, in the centuries since. And I had to record it in the original translation, which is in Middle English. So there was quite a lot of research involved in that one. And I literally finished that a couple of weeks ago, and it's now with the sound editor and Naxos who are producing it, and I think it's going to come on the market in November. I should make it clear, Jamie, I've got a recording studio here in France. And having spent many years in recording studios for BBC and various commercial enterprises in Britain before I moved here, I'm used to studio discipline and so on. And so Naxos entrust me with doing the recordings here. I have a recording studio set to the same standards as if I were in a studio in London. And I record the books here. And then, thanks to the incredible modern technology, I can get my recordings to them via Dropbox or various other means, WeTransfer or whatever, and they do the edit in London, and hey presto, and the records are on the shelves. That and my poetry are the two ways that I fill my time here.
Before we end this, you don't have to answer this, but obviously, what do you think your character in The Rejects, what do you think Basil Stoker would be doing now?
It makes me laugh. What a good question. If he were 20 years older now, I think he would be sitting in his house in wherever he lives. I think when we filmed, he was in sort of northwest London somewhere. In his terraced house, and there would be a few cups on the wall. I think he would still be dubbining his boots. I bet you he'd be mixed up with the local scouts or something, and I think he'd probably be down the park with a boys' football team of a Sunday morning, and so on. I expect he'd be very opinionated. I'm pretty sure that he would be pro Brexit. And I don't know what he would make of COVID-19. He'd probably think we were all sissies for not going out and facing it.
Quite possibly, yes.
And I think he would be entirely bald. He was pretty bald then. Don't you think Stoker by now would have concocted his memoirs?
Quite possibly, yeah.
He might call it A Man's Game.
Yeah. Actor Bill Homewood discussing his life in and out of the Renford Rejects.